The rain on Orin 4 did not fall. It crashed. It came down in wide, heavy sheets that turned the canyon floor into a shallow river of mud and broken leaves. The jungle overhead was thick enough to hold most of it back, but not all. Long fingers of water found the gaps in the canopy and came through in cold, punishing streams. David Reyes was not supposed to be in the canyon. He was supposed to be 2 kilometers east, collecting soil samples from the root shelf near the ridge. That was where his permit said he could go. That was the area station Crest had cleared with the Galactic Union before he ever set foot on the planet. But the storm had rolled in fast, faster than his weather scanner had predicted, and the ridge was open ground with no shelter. The canyon had a rock face. The rock face had overhangs. So he ran for it. He found a good one, wide, deep, angled just right to keep the worst of the rain off. He pressed himself against the back wall, caught his breath, and waited for the scanner to tell him the storm would pass in under an hour. He set down his kit bag. He exhaled. Then he looked to his left and went very still. The nest was built into the curve of the rock. He could see it clearly now that his eyes had adjusted. A shallow bowl of packed mud, dried grass, and what looked like crushed bone, maybe 3 meters across. Most of it was empty, but not all of it. In the center of the nest, barely visible through the dim, rain-gray light, was a hatchling. David knew what it was. Everyone at Station Crest had been briefed on the Orani before their first week on Orin 4 was finished. They were the apex species of this planet. Massive, intelligent, semi-telepathic, and covered in scales that shifted color with their mood. Adults could reach 40 feet from nose to tail. They did not attack humans without reason. But disturbing a nest was reason enough, and the law backed them fully. Interference with an Orani juvenile was a capital offense under Galactic Union Code, Section 14, Article 9. No exceptions. The hatchling was no bigger than a house cat. Her scales were pale silver blue, almost white, and they caught the low light like the surface of still water. She was curled tight in the middle of the empty nest, trembling in small, fast pulses. The storm had killed the temperature. She was cold. Her mother was not here. David did not move. He did not speak. He breathed slowly and kept his back flat against the rock and tried to be nothing. If he left now, he would be soaked to the skin and struck by lightning on open ground. If he stayed, he was in an Orani nest without authorization. Both options were bad. The first one might just kill him. The second one would definitely ruin his life. He was deciding between them when the hatchling moved. She lifted her head. Her eyes were pale gold, oversized for her face, still blinking against the low light. She made a sound, not exactly a sound, more of a feeling. David felt it in the bones of his chest before he heard anything. A subsonic cry, low and continuous, the way a held breath becomes a sob. She was looking at him. He pressed his lips together and did not move. She crawled forward, slowly, unevenly, the way newborns move when their limbs do not yet follow instructions well. She crossed the nest in small lurching stages. She reached the edge of the mud bowl. She kept coming. David's right hand was resting on the rock beside his leg, palm down, fingers loose. He had not thought to move it. He thought about moving it now. He thought about it very seriously. She reached his hand before he made a decision. She touched it first with her nose, a single, tentative press of her snout against his knuckles. He felt the cold of her scales and the warmth underneath it, the living heat of a small creature that had not yet built up enough of it to keep itself alive in this weather. Then she grabbed his fingers. Her grip was extraordinary. Both small forelegs wrapped around 3 of his fingers and locked, claws curled under his palm, and she pulled herself the rest of the way forward until she was pressed against the side of his hand and wrist and the cuff of his jacket. She made the subsonic sound again, once, very quietly. Then she went still. She was not asleep. She was just done moving. David stared at her for a long time. The rain kept falling. The canyon kept roaring with runoff water. He could feel the small percussion of her heartbeat where her chest pressed against his hand. It was very fast. Then it began to slow. He did not pull away. He told himself it was because he did not want to hurt her. He told himself it was because pulling away suddenly might stress a protected species juvenile. He told himself a lot of things while she fell asleep against his fingers in the middle of an unauthorized nest site on a planet he had come to study fungi on. He did not pull away because she was cold, and she had grabbed his hand, and some things do not need a reason beyond that. Outside the overhang, the rain hammered the canyon and the jungle and the rock, and inside it, one human and one baby dragon stayed still together, and neither of them let go. 6 hours into sitting on a cold rock floor with a sleeping dragon on his hand, Davin ran out of ways to pretend the situation might quietly resolve itself. He reached his left hand across his body, inch by careful inch, and pulled his comm unit from his chest pocket. He clicked the channel open on the lowest volume setting. He put it close to his mouth. "Hessa," he said, barely a whisper. "Static." "Then, Reyes? You missed your check-in. Storm cleared 40 minutes ago. We were about to. I need you to come to the lower canyon. Sector 9, near the east face. That's out of your permit zone." "I know." A pause. He could hear her thinking. Hessa did not ask unnecessary questions when she heard the tone in someone's voice that said the questions could wait. "How bad?" Davin looked down at the hatchling, who had shifted in her sleep to press her cheek more firmly against his knuckle. "Bring Commander Yilda," he said. "And your camera." He closed the channel and waited. They appeared at the canyon rim 40 minutes later, two small figures against the sky, looking down at him through binoculars. He did not wave. He barely moved. "Sorry." He had started calling her sorry in his head, which he knew was not a good sign, was still asleep, but lightly. He could feel the change in her breathing every time he shifted his weight. Hessa's voice came through the comm again, quieter now that she could see him. "Davin, is that what I think it is?" "Yes." "And it's—" "Yes." A long silence. Then Yilda's voice, flat and controlled. "Reyes, walk me through how this happened." He did. He kept it short. Yilda listened without interrupting, which meant she was either very calm or very angry, and with Yilda those two things looked identical from the outside. "All right," she said finally. "Here is our situation. If you remove the hatchling from contact, that's interference. If you've been in direct prolonged contact with a juvenile or an eye, the imprint window may already be compromised, which puts us in abandonment territory if you now leave. Every available option under Union Code 14 is bad. I know. This conversation is being logged. I know that too." Hessa cut in. "The camera feed hits the uplink automatically. It's already been transmitted to the Union relay." A pause. "I'm sorry, Davin. I didn't realize until I turned it on." He looked up at the rim. Even from this distance, he could see Hessa holding her equipment with both hands, not moving. He almost smiled. How long until someone official shows up? Depending on who's closest? 2 days. Maybe less. He exhaled slowly, carefully, so as not to wake the small creature attached to his hand. "All right. Can someone bring me food? And a blanket?" There was a very long silence. "You understand," Yilda said, "that you may be facing criminal charges." "Yes." "And you want a blanket?" "It's cold down here, Commander." Another silence. Then, from Hessa, a sound that she was clearly trying very hard not to let become a laugh. "I'll bring the thermal one from the medical bay." The rest of that morning moved in slow pieces. Hessa rigged a rope line down the canyon face and lowered a pack with food, water, and the blanket. Davin ate left-handed, one slow bite at a time. Sori woke when the pack scraped the rock face and stared at it with enormous golden eyes for nearly 10 minutes before deciding it was not interesting. Then she went back to sleep. She woke properly around midday. That was when the situation changed from complicated to something else entirely. She explored. Her legs were steadier now that she was warm. She investigated Davin's sleeve with great seriousness, sniffing along every seam. She tried to eat the strap of his datapad. She climbed up to his shoulder, looked out at the canyon with an expression of intense focus, then climbed back down and pressed her head against his palm again like she was checking he was still there. He was still there. Hessa was still on the rim, documenting everything. Davin could hear the quiet click of her equipment. He did not ask her to stop. There was no point. And some part of him, a part he would not have admitted to under any formal questioning, was glad someone was writing it down. Whatever this was, it felt like it should be remembered correctly. By late afternoon, Sori had begun to imitate his hand movements with her forepaws. When he spread his fingers, she spread hers. When he curled them, she curled hers. She watched his hand with the absolute concentration of something that was learning what hands were by watching one very specific hand do very small and ordinary things. Hessa, watching from the rim, said quietly into the calm, "She thinks you're her mother. I know. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. I know. She's very beautiful, David." He looked down at the small silver-blue creature sitting in his lap, carefully folding and unfolding her claws in time with his fingers. "I know," he said again. It was the only honest thing left to say. Above them the sky went from blue to gold to the deep, burning orange of an orange for sunset, and neither of them moved. And somewhere in the galaxy a Union inspector was already reading a very strange report and booking passage to a planet he had never heard of before that morning. The second morning came in sideways light through the canyon mouth, pale and gold, touching the rock face in long warm stripes. David had not slept. He had drifted once or twice, chin dropping, startling awake. But Sori had been restless through the night. Up, down, investigating, pressing against him, then standing at the overhang edge and staring into the dark canyon below with her scales cycling through colors he did not yet have names for. He had learned something in those hours. When she was calm, her scales were silver blue, soft and still. When she was curious, flecks of green appeared at the edges. When she was anxious, the silver went pale, almost white. She had been white a lot during the night. She was white now, standing at the edge, looking down. Then she made a sound. Not the subsonic grief cry from the first night. This was different, shorter, brighter, a single pulse of vibration that David felt in his chest and his teeth at the same time. A recognition sound. The kind of sound something makes when it sees what it was waiting for. David stood up slowly. His legs were stiff and wrong after a night on a rock floor. He stepped forward until he could see past the edge of the overhang, and he looked down into the canyon. She was there. The mother, Orcs, came up the canyon floor like weather arriving. She was enormous, 40 feet, maybe more, with scales the deep color of hammered gold shot through with veins of electric blue. Every step she took left a clean print in the soft canyon mud. Her head was the size of a transport pod, low to the ground as she climbed, and her eyes, each one the size of a serving plate, were fixed on the overhang with an attention that had no warmth in it at all. On the canyon rim, Hessa went completely silent. Even through the calm, there was no sound from her at all. Orcs reached the base of the overhang and stopped. She raised her head. She looked at Sori first, a long, careful sweep of attention that made Sori vibrate and chirp and press forward on her short legs. Then she looked at David. He did not move. He had thought, in the long cold hours of the night, about what he would do if this moment came. He had made a decision. He would not run. Running was the signal of prey, and he was not prey, and beyond that, he could not outrun something that large on canyon terrain. He would stand still, take up as little space as possible, and let her read the situation herself. She was intelligent. The briefings had said that clearly. She would see that the hatchling was warm and fed and unharmed. He hoped she would see that. Orcs lowered her head further until her jaw nearly touched the mud. She was eye level with the overhang now. Her exhale came out as a warm gust that smelled of stone and deep forest and something metallic underneath. David held his breath and stayed still. Sori ran forward. She got to the edge of the overhang and stopped, looking down at her mother. Her scales went a bright, shimmering green. She chirped again. Then she turned around, walked back to David, climbed onto his boot, and pressed her head against his knee. Silence. Orcs watched this. Her expression, if it was an expression, did not change, but her eyes moved. From Sori on David's boot, to David's hand hanging at his side, to his face, and then back to Sori. Back and forth, reading something, measuring something. The calculation happening behind those eyes was ancient and complex, and David could not follow it. But he could feel it happening the way you feel a pressure change before rain. He did not speak. He did not gesture. He breathed very slowly and kept his hands visible and relaxed. Orcs made a sound. It came up from somewhere deep in her chest and moved through the canyon like a wave moves through water, not loud, but present everywhere at once. The rock hummed. David's sternum hummed. Sori went bright silver and pressed herself more firmly against his leg. David waited. Then Orth stepped back. One step, then two. She did not turn away. She did not leave. She folded her legs under herself in a slow, deliberate movement and settled at the base of the overhang like a wall made of gold and blue. She tucked her wings against her sides. She lowered her chin to the mud and watched. Not attacking, not retreating, watching. Hessa's voice came through the calm, barely above a whisper. Davin, I see it. Are you all right? He looked down at Sori, who had climbed up to his knee and was looking at her mother with bright green scales and an expression of perfect satisfaction, as if this was the correct outcome she had arranged on purpose. I think so, he said. She didn't drive you out. No. She's just sitting there. Yes. A pause. What does that mean? Davin looked at the enormous dragon settled at the entrance to his shelter. He looked at the hatchling on his knee. He looked at the canyon around them, ancient and deep and alive with the sounds of a planet that had been here long before any human ever set foot on it. I think it means she's decided I'm not a threat, he said, or not enough of one to deal with right now. He sat back down on the rock floor, carefully, so Sori could adjust her grip. She did, settling across his thigh like a cat who had been doing exactly this for years. Her scales went back to their soft silver blue. Her eyes closed slowly, then fully. Outside, Orth watched. The canyon light moved. Somewhere above them, Hessa kept the camera running, because whatever this was, it needed to be written down. And Davin sat in a nest that was not his, next to a mother that was not his species, holding a small dragon who had made up her mind. Inspector Brand arrived on the third day in a Union shuttle that was slightly too large to land comfortably on the station crest pad. He stepped out in a pressed gray uniform with his case files already open on his data board, and he introduced himself to Commander Yilda with the polished efficiency of a man who had handled 200 interspecies incidents and expected this to be the 201st. He was taken to the canyon rim and handed a pair of binoculars. He looked through them for a long time without speaking. Below, in the overhang, Davin Reyes was eating a nutrition bar with his left hand. Sori was asleep across his legs. She had grown noticeably in 3 days. Her scales still pale silver blue, but her body longer now, heavier, her claws bigger. Orth was visible at the base of the overhang, massive and golden, asleep herself in the thin morning sun. Brant lowered the binoculars. The mother is present and not acting in a hostile manner toward the human. Correct, said Yilda. And the juvenile has not been separated from him since initial contact. Correct. Brant turned the data board around and pointed at a section of text. Under Union Code 14, Article 9, Subsection C, traumatic separation of an imprinted protected juvenile constitutes harm to a protected species. If the bond is real, and it appears to be real, removing Mr. Reyes by force now would put me in violation of the same code I was sent here to enforce. That's what our legal review found too, Yilda said. Why didn't someone remove the juvenile in the first 6 hours, before imprinting could complete? Yilda looked at him steadily. She had his hand. He did not drop her. Brant was quiet for a moment. Then he opened a new section on his data board. I'll attempt communication with the mother through the standard translation array. We may be able to negotiate a transfer of custody. Hessa, standing nearby, opened her mouth. You may speak, Brant said. Or and I do not respond to vocal translation arrays, Hessa said carefully. They communicate through harmonic vibration and color shift. The array produces language in a register they don't use. It's like trying to show a painting to someone by describing the sounds the brushstrokes made. Brant looked at her. Then he looked at his data board, which had a section labeled Communication Tools, under which the translation array was the only listed option. He closed that section. I see. He spent the rest of the morning on the canyon rim, watching. Davin had settled into a routine by now. Hessa lowered food twice a day in the rope pack. Sori had been receiving protein paste mixed with nutrients from the station's biology stores, and she was eating with enthusiasm and growing fast. She followed Davin's hand movements the way a student follows a teacher, watching his fingers open and close, trying it herself with her own forepaws, looking up at him after each attempt. By midday, something new happened. Orth rose from her resting spot, disappeared into the canyon for an hour, and came back carrying a large prey animal in her jaws. She dropped it at the entrance to the overhang. Then she went back to her resting spot. Did she just? Brant said. Yes, said Hessa. For the hatchling? Hessa hesitated. Possibly for the hatchling. Possibly for both of them. We're not sure how she's categorizing Reyes at this point. Brant wrote something in his file. His handwriting, Yilda noticed, had become less neat as the day went on. He went down into the canyon himself late in the afternoon, accompanied by one enforcement officer who stayed well back. He stood at the edge of Oritha's resting zone, about 20 meters from the overhang, and observed from there. Orith opened one eye, regarded him with the same flat attention she had given the canyon walls, and closed it again. Brant stepped forward. She opened the eye again. He stopped. She watched him without moving. He stood there for 15 minutes. She did not attack him. She did not allow him closer either. When he tried a third step forward, the scales along her neck shifted from gold to a deep, burning copper, and he felt a sound in his chest that had no source he could point to, and he stepped back. He went back up to the rim. The mother is not permitting third-party access to the nest site, he said, writing it down as he said it. No, Yilda agreed. But she's also not attacking anyone. No. She's just maintaining a perimeter around the human. Brant wrote that down too. He stood at the rim for a while longer as the sun began to drop behind the canyon edge. Below, Davin had laid out his blanket and was logging data on his pad with his left hand. Sori was arranged across his right arm like a scarf, asleep, her silver scales catching the last of the light. He's logging research notes, Brant said, while sitting in an unauthorized location under the guard of an apex predator with a protected species juvenile on his arm. He says the root fungal data doesn't stop being relevant just because his situation is unusual, Hessa offered. Brant closed his data board. He looked down into the canyon for a long moment. I've handled incidents on 14 planets, he said, not to anyone in particular. This is the first time I've needed a new category. He went back to the station to file a report that was going to take him most of the night to write, and down in the canyon Davin kept logging his notes, and Sori slept on, and Orith watched the rim with her copper-gold eyes until full dark, and then she watched the dark instead. Nobody announced that Elder Castle was coming. There was no signal, no advanced communication, no record in any Union database of how Orni elders were notified of territory disputes. One morning, on the 5th day, Hessa looked up from her equipment and saw the canyon walls moving. They were not moving. Castle was moving, and Castle was so large that from a distance the shape did not register as a creature. She came down from the upper canyon in slow, tectonic steps, her body pale as old bone, her scales the washed-out silver of something that has lived long enough to lose its color. They were translucent at the edges. Light passed through them. She was ancient in the way that mountains are ancient, not old and tired, but old and permanent. Every sound in the canyon stopped. The birds stopped. The insects stopped. The rustling in the undergrowth went still. Even the wind seemed to pull back. Orith, enormous as she was, pressed herself flat when Castle passed and did not lift her head until Castle had moved 3 full body lengths beyond her. On the canyon rim, Inspector Brant had gone the color of old paper. What is that? He said, very quietly. What does that mean for us? It means if she decides the human needs to go, the Union will agree with her, and we cannot do anything about it. Brant was quiet for a moment. Then, and if she decides something else, then that's also law. Below them, Davin had seen her. He had stood up from his blanket, Sori tucked against his chest with both his arms around her. He stood at the back of the overhang and watched the elder come, and he did not run, because there was nowhere to run to, and he had made his peace with that on day 2. Castle stopped in front of the overhang. She lowered her head, a slow, deliberate movement like a crane lowering a weight, until her face was at the level of the overhang floor. Her eye, which was the size of Davin's chest, was pale gold with a pupil that had gone thin in the morning light, and she looked at him with it the way a geologist looks at rock, reading layers, reading time. Davin looked back. Sori, pressed against his chest, made a soft sound. One tiny forepaw found his collar and gripped it. She did not pull away from Castle. She pressed closer to Davin. Whatever understanding a 5-day-old creature has of the world, Sori's understanding was organized around this. Davin was the center, and everything else was arranged around him. Castle's eye moved from Davin's face to his hand. The right hand, the one Sori had grabbed in the rain. She studied it for a long time. Then she shifted her attention to Sori, reading the small creature the way she had read the man, carefully, without hurry. She turned back to Orth. What happened next lasted perhaps 4 minutes. Castle produced a sound so low that Hessa's instruments detected it as a seismic event and logged it before she could recategorize the reading. Orth answered, back and forth. The two of them spoke in a frequency that the canyon walls conducted and the humans standing on the rim felt in their bones without ever hearing with their ears. It was not a sound you processed. It was a sound you experienced. Hessa's hands were shaking a little. She was trying to cross-reference the vibration patterns against her behavioral database, but there was not enough data. No one had ever recorded an Orcs elder judgment before. No human had ever been close enough. The exchange ended. Castle was still for a long moment. Then she stepped forward, extended one foreleg, and touched Davin's right hand with the tip of one claw. Gently, precisely, the way you touch something you are naming. She held the contact for 3 seconds. Then she withdrew, turned, and left the canyon the way she had come. The birds came back first, then the insects, then the wind. Orth lifted her head slowly. In the overhang, Sori had fallen asleep, completely relaxed, as if the last 5 minutes had been very boring. Brant said nothing for almost 2 full minutes. Then, what did that mean? Hessa was still pulling at her database. She read quietly for a long time. There's a gesture, she said finally. In the behavioral record from Station Pharaoh, 12 years ago. An Orcs used it with a juvenile that had been separated from its nest group and temporarily fostered by another adult. The researcher flagged it, but didn't have enough context to interpret it fully. She turned her screen around so Brant could see the entry. The gesture is used between Orcs when one party is acknowledging that another party has a legitimate bond claim. To another Orcs, it means, this one is counted. This one belongs. The words sat in the air for a moment. She extended that acknowledgement to Davin. Hessa said. Brant read the database entry 3 times. He closed his data board. He opened it again. He looked down at the canyon where the human biologist was sitting on the floor of an ancient nest with a growing silver-blue dragon asleep across his lap, logging fungal root data on his pad. He's been claimed, Brant said. By the elder of the territory, yes. What does union law do with that? Hessa said, very carefully. I think union law has never needed an answer to that question before today. Down in the canyon, Orth stretched her great neck, gave the overhang one long look, and settled back into her resting spot. The decision had been made. The territory had spoken. The rest of it was just paperwork. And Davin Reyes, who had come to this planet to study root systems, sat in a dragon's nest and wrote field notes, and did not know yet what had just been decided on his behalf. Only that the enormous creature at the entrance had stopped watching him with suspicion and was watching the canyon instead. That was enough for now. That was more than enough. 6 weeks after the rain, Sori was the size of a large dog and getting bigger every day. She found Davin by smell now. The canyon was wide and deep and full of paths that went nowhere predictable, but none of that mattered. She would disappear into the undergrowth for an hour, sometimes 2, and then come back from whatever direction he least expected, pushing through the broad-leafed plants with her growing body and arriving at his side with a pleased expression that needed no translation. She brought things. An interesting rock, gray and smooth. A large beetle still very much alive and deeply unhappy about being carried. Once, memorably, a small mammal that turned out to be fine and ran away quickly when she set it down. She placed everything in front of Davin with the same careful pride. He thanked her for each one. He lived at the canyon now, properly. Station Crest had rigged a better shelter into the overhang. Real wall panels, a proper bedroll, a small cooking unit, a charging station for his equipment. It was not comfortable exactly, but it worked. Hessa came down the rope line most mornings to bring supplies and stay for a few hours. She brought his research samples and his soil data, and they worked side by side in the overhang, while Sori investigated things nearby and Orth slept in the canyon sun. Inspector Brandt's final report had taken 11 days to write and had been reviewed by 7 different union legal committees before anyone was willing to put an official stamp on it. The conclusion, when it finally came through on Yildiz Com, was 4 paragraphs of dense legal language that translated to this: no charges, no removal, new category. The Galactic Union had created Regulation 14C, subsection 7, accidental imprint bond. David Reyes was its founding case. He was required to remain on Orin 4 as Sori's co-guardian until she reached juvenile independence. The Xenoanthropology Division estimated 4 to 6 years. His field biology contract had been extended indefinitely. Station Crest had received additional funding to support the ongoing documentation of an unprecedented interspecies bond event. HFY had published a preliminary paper. It had caused what she described, with visible satisfaction, as a small scientific riot. Universities wanted access. Research teams wanted permits. 3 separate xenobiology institutions had sent formal requests to establish observation posts near the canyon. Yilda was managing the application queue with the expression she used for things she found both necessary and deeply irritating. Brant returned once more to close the official file. He came down into the canyon himself this time, staying well back, but not as far back as before. Orith opened one eye, looked at him, and closed it again. That was improvement. He stood watching the overhang for a while, where Davin was crouched over a sample tray and Sori was systematically dismantling the edge of his data pad strap again. Then Sori decided she wanted to show him something. She grabbed his sleeve in the way she had developed recently. Not a hatchling grip anymore, but a deliberate, purposeful tug, like a hand on an elbow. She pulled. Davin set down his sample tools, stood up, and let himself be walked across the canyon floor to a new cave opening she had discovered 2 days before. It was not a large cave. It was interesting to Sori, which meant it needed to be investigated, which meant Davin needed to come and look at it. He turned on his field light. She went in first. He followed. Brant watched them disappear into the rock face. He watched Orith, who had lifted her head to track the movement and then lowered it again. He stood in the canyon for a while, listening to the sounds of the planet doing what it did, and then HFY appeared at his shoulder with a thermos. "You asked me a while ago," she said, "whether he regrets it. I remember. I asked him. About 2 weeks in. She poured 2 cups and handed him one. He said she was cold, and she grabbed his hand. He said, 'What was I supposed to do?'" Brant held the cup and did not say anything. From inside the cave came the faint sound of Sori making her discovery sound, that short bright pulse that meant she had found something worth noting. Then Davin's voice, low and even, saying something they could not quite make out. Then Sori again, a satisfied hum of a sound, low and warm and continuous. Brant recognized the sound. He had heard HFY describe it in her documentation notes. It was what Orani juveniles used with the adults they trusted completely. It was the closest thing they had to a purr. "He's going to be here for years," Brant said. "Yes. He's all right with that." Brant closed his official file for the last time. He had written, in the final summary section, something that was not standard legal language, but that no one on the review committee had asked him to remove. This case does not resolve into any existing framework because the human involved did not operate within any existing framework. He acted on instinct, under pressure, with no expectation of outcome. The result is an interspecies bond that has no precedent in Union records. We have written the rules around what he did. We have not yet determined whether the rules are the point. He left the canyon as the afternoon light began to change, and he did not look back, because there was nothing left to oversee, and some things are better left to continue on their own. Inside the cave, Davin crouched with his field light raised, looking at whatever Sori had found. A crystal formation, pale and clustered, catching the light in small bright points. Sori was curled around his boots in the particular way she had developed for enclosed spaces, her scales a warm and steady silver blue. The purr moved through the rock. Davin made a small note in his pad. He had come to this planet to study root networks. He had not expected to become one. Outside, the canyon breathed. The jungle pressed in green and endless on all sides, and Orith watched the cave mouth from her place in the sun, and the planet went on being vast and old and alive around one human who had stayed. He had stayed because a small cold creature grabbed his hand in the rain. That was all. That was everything.